Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into what could be the final days of the Ayatollahs. We're talking about a 45-year-old regime that is teetering right on the edge of collapse, and we're going to break down the anatomy of this revolution, step by explosive step.
So, the big question is, how does this even happen? I mean, how does a regime that has held on for nearly half a century suddenly find itself on the brink? Well, you might be surprised. It doesn't start with a big bang. No. It starts with something much quieter, a really calculated act of defiance.
It all starts right here, with a closed door. Picture this, December 28, 2025. The Grand Bazaar in Tehran, which is usually the bustling heart of the country's economy, is dead silent.
Why?
The shopkeepers just didn't open up. That single, quiet act, that was the spark. That was the match that lit a fuse that would become absolutely uncontrollable.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just another protest. Not even close. This was the culmination of a total perfect storm. I'm talking about a catastrophic combination of military, economic, and ideological failure that had been boiling just under the surface for months.
And what's really fascinating here, what made this spark so powerful, was who lit it. The Bazaris. This is the merchant class, the very same people who were the financial engine of the 1979 revolution that brought the Ayatollahs to power in the first place. Now they're turning on the exact system they helped build. So to really get why they were so desperate, we need to jump back 6 months and watch the first two critical dominoes get lined up ready to topple.
All right, domino number one. This one was a massive, catastrophic military humiliation back in June of 2025. And look, this wasn't just a loss in the battlefield, it was a total public takedown of the regime's entire image of power.
People are calling it the 12-Day War. In response to some proxy escalations, Israel unleashed something called Operation Rising Lion. And this was completely different from the old shadow wars. This was direct, it was out in the open, and it was an absolutely overwhelming air assault that hit targets deep inside 27 of Iran's 31 provinces. Just think about that scale. The results were, well, they were surgically precise and strategically devastating. Israeli air power, and later American, just neutralized Iran's air defenses. Poof, the regime was basically flying blind. And then they went straight for the crown jewels, obliterating the nuclear facilities at Natanz and even the super-fortified deep underground site at Fordow. This set their nuclear program back decades, and just like that, the regime lost its biggest bargaining chip on the world stage.
And this is where you really see what people mean by hollow power. The IRGC, the regime's elite guard, their big response was to launch almost 2,000 missiles and drones. And what happened? Almost nothing. Negligible strategic damage. They couldn't even stop Israeli jets from flying with impunity over their own country. So that whole myth of being this invincible power, it was completely shattered.
So here's the bottom line, the really crucial part. The perception on the street completely flipped. Suddenly you have over half the country saying, yeah, Israel won that. Only 16% thought Tehran was successful. Think about it. The one unwritten contract the regime always had, that they'd provide security, even if they mismanaged everything else, that contract was officially broken.
Okay, so that was domino number one. Now let's talk about domino number two, which fell just a few months later in September. With its military reputation in tatters, the regime was about to get hit with complete and total economic and diplomatic strangulation.
This came in the form of something called the UN snapback. The UK, France, and Germany basically pulled a lever that instantly restored all previous United Nations sanctions. Think of it like a global, legally binding economic blockade. This meant even allies like Russia and China were now forced to cut ties, leaving Iran totally and utterly isolated.
And if you want to see the result of that isolation, just look at this number, 1.45 million. By December, that's how many Iranian rials you needed to buy one single US dollar. The national currency didn't just fall, it basically evaporated into thin air. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. The economy fell into a complete abyss. I mean, just look at these numbers. Food inflation at over 64%, oil revenue, the lifeblood of the government, down to just 16% of what was needed. Billions of dollars were just fleeing the country. People's life savings were wiped out in a matter of weeks, and the government's coffers were totally empty.
For the average person, these numbers meant a daily battle just to survive. When the cost of food skyrockets by over 60%, a crisis is just inevitable. Reports suggested a staggering 57% of Iranians were suffering from malnutrition. The state was failing at its most basic job, feeding its people.
So, with a humiliated military and an economy in absolute freefall, we come right back to that closed door on December 28. The Bazaar's spark of protest didn't just smolder. It immediately ignited a nationwide firestorm.
And the speed at which this thing spread was just breathtaking. It starts into Tehran's commercial center on the 28th. 2 days later, boom, it's exploded into 9 provinces. By New Year's Eve, more than half the country, 17 provinces, was in open revolt. This united major cities and small conservative towns in one single wave of anger against the regime.
And then you hear this cry from students at Tehran University. This is so important because it shows another crucial element joining the fight. The Gen Z movement, which had been a force in previous protests, was now joining forces with the merchant class, bridging a critical generational and ideological divide.
But there was something else going on here that was fundamentally different this time around. It wasn't just how big it was or the coalition of people involved. It was the core ideology, the central demand of the people on the street. See, in past protests, you'd hear slogans rejecting the different factions within the Islamic Republic. But this time, calls for reform were completely absent. They were replaced by widespread, open demands for something radically different, the return of the monarchy, with chants of Javid Shah, long live the king.
And this ideological shift was turbocharged by the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He really stepped up, moving from just a distant symbol to more of an operational leader. He provided a strategic framework for the movement, these 5 pillars that past leaderless uprisings had desperately lacked. He gave them a plan.
The regime, of course, responded with predictable and brutal force. But this time, unlike before, the violence was not a one-way street. The people were fighting back, hard.
This is a crucial and frankly shocking statistic. For every protester confirmed killed by the regime, nearly 1 member of the security forces was also killed. This shows the protests had evolved into a low-level insurgency. The regime's monopoly on violence, its ultimate tool of control, was starting to seriously fray.
And adding immense pressure from the outside, the international community, led by an aggressive U.S. administration, offered no lifeline. Instead, it sent threats of intervention. This both emboldened the protesters and terrified a regime that was already reeling from its military defeat just months earlier.
So where does that leave us? Stripped of its military power, its economic stability, and its ideological legitimacy, the regime now stands naked before an enraged population. It leaves a single, terrifying question. Is this the end of the Islamic Republic or the beginning of a violent collapse into a failed state? The answer is being written on the streets as we speak.